Dad's voice was flat when he told me that was not my room anymore. My name was still on the door. Yet 10 seconds after I turned the knob, my stepmother's fist crashed into my face, hitting the floor. I realized they were already counting the money they thought they had stolen from my grandfather. They did not know the girl they abandoned had grown up to be the only person in town who could legally destroy them. My name is Maria Crawford, and for the better part of my adult life, I have walked into the Clearwind County Courthouse with a badge in my pocket and a case file tucked under my arm that usually signaled the end of someone's career. I am a lead investigator for the Northwind Integrity Bureau, a specialized unit designed to root out corruption in the affluent suburbs outside of Denver. My job is to find the rot beneath the floorboards of respectable houses. But today, the autumn sun cutting through the high-arched windows of Courtroom 3 did not shine on me as a hunter. It shone on me as the prey. The sound of my heels against the marble floor was a rhythm I knew better than my own heartbeat. It was a sharp, authoritative staccato that typically made junior associates straighten their ties and defendants look down at their shoes. Today, however, the sound seemed to echo differently, hollow and lonely, bouncing off the mahogany paneling and the rows of empty benches. The air in here always smelled the same, a mixture of lemon oil, old paper, and the metallic tang of anxiety. I had breathed it in 1,000 times before, but standing on this side of the aisle, behind the table reserved for the defense, it tasted bitter. This was familiar territory, yet I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I placed my leather briefcase on the table, the movement precise and controlled. I refused to let my hand tremble. Across the aisle, the opposition was already seated, looking like a portrait of aggrieved suburban nobility. My father, Daniel Crawford, sat with his back straight, wearing a charcoal suit that I knew cost more than $3,000. He was handsome in that aging, distinguished way that allowed men to fail upwards their entire lives. He was checking his watch, a nervous tic he had possessed since I was a child, as if he had somewhere more important to be than watching his daughter fight for her life. Next to him sat Sabrina, my stepmother. Sabrina was a study in calculated victimhood. She wore a soft pastel cardigan over a modest dress, a stark departure from the designer labels she usually flaunted at the country club. Her hair was pulled back loosely, framing a face devoid of makeup, designed to make her look pale and exhausted. She was dabbing at dry eyes with a crumpled tissue, leaning slightly into my father as if she might faint from the sheer emotional toll of my presence. It was a performance. It was theater. And sitting next to them, orchestrating the entire tableau, was Conrad Hale. Hale was the kind of lawyer who smiled with all of his teeth and none of his eyes. He was polished, expensive, and had a reputation for winning cases by burying the opposition in paperwork and character assassination. He looked at me now, a smirk playing on his lips, confident that I was just another angry daughter who had acted out of turn. He had no idea who I really was. To them, I was just Maria, the inconvenience. They did not know that the Northwind Integrity Bureau had taught me how to dismantle a lie from the inside out. They did not realize that while they were playing checkers, I had been memorizing the chessboard for 15 years. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice booming off the vaulted ceiling. I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Evelyn Hart swept into the room. Judge Hart was a legend in Clearwind County. She was a woman of steel and statute, someone who had zero tolerance for theatrics and a razor-sharp memory for legal precedent. I had testified before her a dozen times. I had presented evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and public misconduct in her court. She respected facts, and she respected me. She took her seat, adjusting her glasses as she opened the file in front of her. The courtroom settled into a heavy silence. Judge Hart scanned the header of the documents, her brow furrowing slightly. Then, she looked up. Her gaze drifted to the plaintiff's table, acknowledged Hale, and then moved to the defense. When her eyes landed on me, the professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Her eyebrows lifted. She paused, her hand hovering over her gavel. "Miss Crawford," Judge Hart said, her voice carrying a note of genuine surprise that no court reporter could adequately transcribe. "It is unusual to see you at the defense table." The weight of her recognition hung in the air. Beside me, I saw Conrad Hale stiffen. He had likely promised his clients that this would be a quick administrative matter, a simple restraining order and a probate issue. He had not briefed them on the fact that the defendant was on a first-name basis with the presiding judge. "Good morning, Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice steady, projecting the same cool professionalism I used when outlining a fraud scheme. "I am afraid the circumstances today are personal, not professional." Hale was on his feet instantly, sensing the shift in the room's temperature. "Your Honor, if I may," he interjected, his voice smooth like oil. "We are here regarding a matter of grave domestic urgency. My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Crawford, have been subjected to a campaign of harassment and physical intimidation by the defendant. We are simply seeking to protect the family estate and, more importantly, Mrs. Crawford's physical well-being from a stepdaughter who has unfortunately become unstable." Sabrina let out a small, choked sob at the word unstable. It was perfectly timed. She buried her face in Daniel's shoulder. My father patted her arm awkwardly, keeping his eyes fixed on the judge, refusing to look at me. I sat in silence. I let them use their words. I let them paint their picture. In my line of work, you learn that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to hide. I watched Sabrina's shoulders shake with feigned grief, and for a moment, the courtroom dissolved. The smell of lemon polish vanished, replaced by the scent of fresh paint and expensive perfume. The sound of the bailiff shifting his weight was replaced by the flat, dead tone of my father's voice. "That is not your room anymore." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. But I did not flinch. I could not afford to flinch. Not here, not when they were watching for cracks. I remembered the hallway. I remembered the shock of the door opening. I remembered the look in Sabrina's eyes. Not fear, but pure, unadulterated malice, right before the world tilted sideways and went black. "Miss Crawford?" Judge Hart's voice pulled me back to the present. "Do you have legal representation present, or will you be representing yourself?" It was a valid question. I was a trained investigator, well-versed in the law, and I could have arguably handled a preliminary hearing, but a lawyer who represents herself has a fool for a client, and I was nobody's fool. Furthermore, I knew that to destroy the narrative they were building, this story of the crazy, violent, jealous daughter, I needed someone who could stand beside me and signal to the world that this was not a tantrum, this was a war. "I am represented, Your Honor," I said, gesturing to the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. The doors opened, and Noah Redding walked in. If Conrad Hale was a shark, Noah Redding was the ocean. He did not need to posture. He was a civil rights attorney who had spent the last decade fighting for the disenfranchised, a man who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me 2 years ago when we dismantled a housing kickback scheme that went all the way to the mayor's office. He wore a suit that was rumpled compared to Daniel's, and he carried a battered briefcase that held more integrity than the entire plaintiff's table combined. Noah walked down the aisle, his stride long and relaxed. He nodded to the bailiff, gave a respectful bow to the judge, and came to stand beside me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a firm, grounding weight. "Noah Redding for the defense, Your Honor," he said. His voice was deep, warm, and sounded like the truth. Judge Hart leaned back in her chair, a small, almost imperceptible nod acknowledging him. "Mr. Redding, I see the court is fully assembled." She looked down at the docket again. "We are here to address the petition filed by Daniel and Sabrina Crawford regarding the estate of the late Henry Lawson, specifically the motion to contest the current will and testament based on undue influence, alongside the emergency motion for a restraining order following an alleged assault on Mrs. Crawford." The words hung in the air. Undue influence, assault. They were ugly terms. They were designed to strip me of my credibility, to paint me as a predator preying on my own grandfather, a violent woman attacking a pregnant stepmother. I looked over at Daniel. He was finally looking at me, His eyes were cold, detached, as if I were a bad investment he was trying to liquidate. He thought he had won. He thought that by hitting first, legally and physically, he could silence me. He thought that because he was my father, I would crumble. He thought that because I had walked away from that house bleeding, I was broken. But he had forgotten who raised me. He had forgotten the yellow house on Cedar Street. He had forgotten that while he was chasing status, Henry Lawson was teaching me that the truth is the only thing worth fighting for. Noah leaned in close to me, whispering so only I could hear. "Are you ready for this, Maria? Once we start, we cannot turn back. We are going to have to tear the whole house down." I looked at the judge. I looked at the terrified act Sabrina was still maintaining. And then, slowly, deliberately, I raised my hand to my temple. My fingers brushed against the hairline, tracing the ridge of raised skin that was still tender to the touch. It was a thin scar, hidden by my dark hair, invisible to everyone else in the room. But to me, it was screaming. It was the point of impact. It was where my head had hit the doorframe after Sabrina's fist had connected with my jaw. It was the physical proof of their betrayal. They wanted to talk about assault? They wanted to talk about who the real victim was? Fine. I would give them a story, but I would not give them the fragmented, hysterical version they were hoping for. I would give them the cold, hard, forensic truth. I lowered my hand and looked at Noah. "I have never been more ready in my life," I whispered back. I turned my gaze forward, locking eyes with Judge Hart. The courtroom was silent, waiting. The defense table was no longer a place of shame. It was a launch pad. They had taken my room. They had taken my heirlooms. They had tried to take my dignity, but they had made a fatal calculation. They assumed I was just a daughter mourning a loss. They failed to realize that I was an investigator building a case, and the evidence I was about to lay out started long before I walked into that nursery. It started with a lie my father told me years ago, and today, right here in this room, was the day the bill for that lie finally came due. To understand why I sat at the defense table with a straight spine and a silent heart, you have to understand that the mansion in Lake Hollow was never my home. My father liked to tell people he raised me, that he provided the roof over my head and the clothes on my back, but that was a lie he told so often he started to believe it himself. The truth lived about 40 miles south, in a town called Mesa Ridge, inside a small, slightly lopsided house with yellow siding on Cedar Street. That was where my life actually happened. That was where I learned the difference between law and justice. I was raised by Ruth and Henry Lawson. To the rest of the county, Henry was a retired district court judge with a reputation for terrifying sternness. To me, he was the man who sat in his leather armchair with a mug of black coffee, reading case files out loud as if they were bedtime stories. He did not treat me like a child who needed to be shielded from the world. He treated me like a junior associate who needed to understand how it worked. He would look at me over the rim of his reading glasses, his eyes sharp and clear, and say, "Maria, listen closely. The law is a structure, but justice is a choice. People confuse the two. They think if they follow the rules, they are good, but you can follow every rule in the book and still be wrong." I absorbed those words before I even knew how to do long division. If Henry was the steel backbone of that house, my grandmother Ruth was the heartbeat. She was a woman of soft fabrics and warm ovens, a seamstress and a baker who believed that there was very little in this world that could not be fixed with a heavy quilt or a hot breakfast. My mornings did not start with an alarm clock. They started with the smell of cinnamon and toasted pecans drifting up the stairs. That scent was more than just food. It was the smell of safety. It was the sensory promise that no matter what happened at school, no matter how lonely I felt, there was a place where I belonged. Ruth had a menu for every emotion. Blueberry pancakes meant it was a celebration. Oatmeal meant we had a busy day ahead. And cinnamon waffles meant she knew I was sad, usually because my father had promised to call and had not. Daniel Crawford, my father, was not a resident of the Yellow House. He was a weather event. He would sweep in unexpectedly, usually in a new car that looked too shiny for our gravel driveway, bringing with him a chaotic energy that made the quiet rooms of Cedar Street feel small and dusty. He was always in a hurry, always checking his watch, always talking about the next big deal that was going to change everything. He would kneel down, never quite getting his expensive suit pants dirty, and grab my shoulders. "Maria," he would say, his voice breathless with a manic sort of optimism, "I am doing this for you. I am building an empire so you never have to worry about a thing. I am building our future." Then he would hand me a toy I was too old for, or a dress that was the wrong size, pat my head, and leave. He was always building a future, but he never seemed to have time for the present. Sabrina started appearing when I was around 10. If my father was a storm, Sabrina was a cold front. She would stand by the door, refusing to take off her coat, her heels clicking impatiently on the hardwood floor. She was beautiful in a way that felt manufactured, like a mannequin in a department store window. Her makeup was flawless. Her clothes were tailored, and she looked at the cluttered, cozy warmth of my grandparents' living room with thinly veiled disdain. She never learned my interests. She never asked about school. She would just offer a tight, practiced smile and say, "Hey, kiddo." Kiddo, it was a generic label, a way to acknowledge my existence without having to learn anything about me. Then she would turn to Daniel and whisper that they were running late for a dinner reservation or a gala or a flight, and just like that, they would be gone. For a long time, I was stupid with hope. I think every child of an absent parent has that defect in their programming. We are wired to wait. I would sit on the front porch swing for hours, watching the cars drive down Cedar Street, my heart jumping every time I saw a silver sedan that looked like his. I told myself stories to fill the silence. I told myself that once his business deal closed, once the house in Lake Hollow was finished, once he and Sabrina were settled, he would come back. He would pack my bags, and we would finally be the family he kept promising we were. Henry knew. He never said a word to crush my hope, but he never fed it, either. He would just come out to the porch, sit beside me on the swing, and cover my small hand with his large, papery one. He would sit there as the sun went down and the streetlights flickered on, silently waiting with me until I was ready to go inside. The absences started to pile up like snow against the door. There were school plays where I was the lead, and I would look out into the darkness of the auditorium, searching for Daniel's face. I would see Ruth and Henry in the front row, Ruth beaming and waving a program, Henry nodding solemnly, but the seat next to them was always empty. There were spelling bees and soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. The excuse was always the same: work, travel, building the future. But the breaking point, the moment the glass finally shattered, was my 13th birthday. 13 felt monumental. It was the bridge between being a child and being a teenager. For weeks, Daniel had promised he would be there. He had told me on the phone, his voice booming with performative excitement, that he was taking us all out to the fanciest steakhouse in Denver. He said he had a surprise for me, something big. I spent the entire morning getting ready. Ruth had sewn me a new dress, a deep blue velvet that made me feel grown up. I curled my hair. I sat in the living room at 5 in the afternoon, watching the clock on the mantelpiece tick. 5:30 passed, then 6, then 6:30. The phone rang at 6:45. I knew before Henry even picked it up. I could tell by the way his shoulders stiffened and his jaw set into a hard line. He spoke in short, clipped sentences. "I see. No. I will tell her. No. Daniel, do not speak to her right now. Goodbye." He hung up the phone and turned to look at me. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "He is not coming," I whispered. It wasn't a question. "Something came up," Henry said, his voice devoid of the usual judicial calm. He sounded angry. "A closing on a property. He says he cannot get away." Ruth immediately sprang into action, a frantic energy to her movements. She clapped her hands together and said, "Well, who needs a stuffy steakhouse anyway? I have a roast in the oven that is better than anything in Denver. And wait until you see the cake I made. It is chocolate with raspberry filling. It is huge. Maria, it is the biggest cake I've ever baked." She was trying to fill the hole in the room with sugar and volume. She rushed into the kitchen, and I heard the clatter of pans, the forced cheerfulness in her humming. But I did not move. I sat there in my blue velvet dress, feeling the tears hot and humiliating behind my eyes. It was not just that he wasn't coming, it was that he had chosen not to come. A property closing. A signature on a piece of paper was more important than the day I turned 13. Henry walked over and sat on the coffee table in front of me, forcing me to look him in the eye. He did not offer me a tissue. He did not tell me it was okay, because we both knew it wasn't. "Maria," he said, his voice low and serious, "look at me." I looked up, blinking back the blur of tears. "There is a principle in law called duty of care," he said. "It means that when you take on a responsibility, you are bound to fulfill it. You do not get to choose when it is convenient." He took my hands. His grip was firm, grounding me. "Daniel is your father by blood," Henry continued. "But blood is just biology. It is an accident of nature. Being a parent is a job. It is a series of actions." He paused, making sure I was listening to every syllable. "People do not become parents just because they gave birth to you. Maria, they have to show up. They have to be there when the verdict comes down. They have to be there when the jury is out. If they are not, they forfeit the title." I remember the smell of the roast beef drifting in from the kitchen, mixing with the scent of Henry's old tobacco pipe and the dust of the law books. "Does he love me?" I asked, my voice cracking. Henry sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 disappointing verdicts. "I think he loves the idea of you, Maria. He loves having a daughter he can brag about when it suits him, but he does not know how to love the reality of you, and that is his loss. It is entirely his loss. Do not you dare make it yours." That night, we ate the roast. We ate the cake, which was indeed enormous and tilted slightly to the left. Ruth told funny stories about her childhood, and Henry let me have a small glass of wine, and we laughed. But something inside me had shifted. The desperate, waiting part of me, the part that sat on the porch swing watching for a silver car, had quietly died. 2 weeks later, Daniel finally showed up. He swung by on a Tuesday afternoon, buzzing with energy, holding a jewelry box from a high-end store. He didn't even get out of the car. He just rolled down the window of his Mercedes as I walked out to the driveway. "Happy belated birthday, kiddo," he shouted over the engine. He handed me the box. It was a bracelet, expensive and impersonal, gold with little diamond charms. It looked like something Sabrina would wear. Not me. "Sorry about the dinner," he said, flashing that charming, empty smile. "But wait until you see the commission on this deal. It is going to be huge. I am doing this for you. Maria, you know that, right?" I stood there on the gravel, holding the velvet box. I was 13 years and 2 weeks old, but I felt 50. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the way his eyes kept darting to the dashboard clock. I saw the way he kept the engine running, his foot hovering over the gas pedal, ready to bolt the second he felt he had done his duty. I realized then that Henry was right. He wasn't building a future for me. He was building a monument to himself, and I was just a prop he intended to place on the shelf whenever the construction was finished. "It is okay, Dad," I said. My voice was calm. It surprised even me. "Great," he said, relieved that he didn't have to manage a scene. "You are a good kid. I will call you next week." He didn't wait for a response. He rolled up the window, the tinted glass turning him into a silhouette, and peeled out of the driveway. Dust kicked up around my ankles. I watched the red taillights fade down Cedar Street. I did not cry. I did not feel that familiar ache of longing. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity settling in my chest. It was the first layer of armor, the first brick in the wall I would build around myself. I turned around and looked at the yellow house. Ruth was in the window, watching me with a worried expression. Henry was standing in the doorway, leaning on the frame, his presence solid as a mountain. I walked back toward them. I walked past the porch swing where I used to wait. I tightened my grip on the expensive, meaningless bracelet in my hand. I am done waiting, I told myself. If I wanted a future, I was going to have to build it myself, and if I wanted a family, I realized I was already looking at it. The man in the doorway and the woman in the window, they were the ones who showed up. The man in the Mercedes was just a stranger with the same last name. I walked up the steps, past Henry, and into the house that smelled like cinnamon. I put the bracelet in a drawer and went to the kitchen to help Ruth with the dishes. That was the day Maria, the daughter, died. And Maria, the survivor, began to take her first breath. The drive to Lake Hollow felt less like a journey home and more like a procession into enemy territory. I was 24 years old, fresh out of law school, and wearing a black dress that still smelled faintly of the lilies from my grandfather's funeral. Henry Lawson had been buried 3 days ago. The earth over his coffin was still fresh, and the ache in my chest was a physical weight, a stone that made it hard to breathe. But I had a task to complete. Before he died, Henry had told me about a small wooden box and a stack of leather-bound notebooks he had sent to my father's house for safekeeping years ago. Back when his own health began to decline, and he worried about theft at the Cedar Street house. "They are in your room, Maria," he had whispered, his voice raspy with the end of life. "Make sure you get them. They are for you." My room. The concept felt foreign. The house in Lake Hollow was a sprawling, modern monstrosity of glass and steel that my father, Daniel, had built as a monument to his newfound liquidity. I had spent perhaps a total of 6 weeks there over the last decade, mostly during awkward holiday visits where I slept in a guest room that they insisted on calling Maria's room to keep up appearances. It held my high school debate trophies, some old clothes, and presumably, the box Henry had entrusted to Daniel. I pulled my beat-up sedan into the circular driveway, parking next to Daniel's pristine luxury SUV. The house loomed over me, cold and imposing. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my face pale. I did not look like a lawyer. I looked like a grieving granddaughter. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and got out of the car. Daniel met me at the door before I could even ring the bell. He was wearing a sweater that looked soft and expensive, his face flushed with a nervous energy that set my teeth on edge. "Maria," he said, blocking the doorway slightly, "I did not expect you so soon. We thought you would take some time, to process." "I am processing." "Dad," I said, stepping past him into the foyer. The house smelled of eucalyptus and aggressive cleanliness. It was the smell of a place where no one actually lived, where dirt was afraid to settle. "I just came to pick up the things Grandpa Henry left for me, the box and the notebooks. He said they were in my room." Sabrina appeared from the living room. She was pregnant, heavily so. Her hand resting protectively on the swell of her stomach, she wore a flowing white dress that made her look like a distorted version of a fertility goddess. Her smile was tight, failing to reach her eyes. "Oh, Maria," she said, her voice a high, brittle chime. "You really should not be worrying about material things right now. You should be grieving. We are all grieving." I did not miss the irony. Sabrina had spent the funeral checking her phone and complaining about the humidity. "I am not here to argue. Sabrina," I said, my voice steady, "I just want my grandfather's things. Then I will leave you to your evening." I moved toward the grand staircase that spiraled up to the second floor. My heels clicked sharply on the polished marble, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. Daniel stepped in front of the stairs. His nervousness hardened into something colder, something defensive. "Maria, wait," he said. I looked at him. "What is the problem? Dad?" "It will take 5 minutes." He exchanged a glance with Sabrina. It was a look I knew well. The conspiratorial glance of two people who had agreed on a lie and were now scrambling to maintain it. "You cannot go up there," Daniel said. "Why not?" I asked, my patience fraying. "Because," he said, his voice going flat and final, "that is not your room anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I stared at him. The cruelty of it was not in the statement itself. I did not live there, after all, but in the timing, in the erasure. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "My stuff is in there. Grandpa's stuff is in there." We needed the space. Sabrina cut in, stepping up beside Daniel. "For the baby. You have to understand. Maria, we are starting a new chapter. We cannot be living in the past." We packed everything up. "Packed it up?" I repeated. "Where is it?" "Storage," Daniel said quickly. "Or donated. We are not sure. It was mostly junk. Maria, old papers, trophies. We cleared it out months ago." "Donated?" I felt a spike of panic. Those were legal documents. That box was personal. You had no right to touch it. I stepped around him. "I need to see." "Maria, stop!" Daniel barked, reaching for my arm, but I was faster. I was already on the stairs, taking them two at a time. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It was not just about the box anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the fact that Henry Lawson had been dead for 3 days, and they were already erasing his memory, erasing my existence in this house. "Don't you dare cause a scene!" Sabrina shrieked from the bottom of the stairs. She was following me now, her movements surprisingly fast for her condition. "You have no respect. This is our home." I reached the landing and turned down the long hallway. The door was the third on the left. My breath caught in my throat. The little glow-in-the-dark plastic letters were still there. Maria. I had stuck them there when I was 15. During one of the brief periods I tried to make this place feel like home. They looked pathetic now, cheap and childish against the expensive cream-colored paint. There was no keep out sign. There was no lock. I could hear Daniel and Sabrina pounding up the stairs behind me, shouting, but the sound seemed to fade into the background. My world narrowed down to that brass doorknob. I reached out and turned it. The latch clicked. I pushed the door open. I stopped dead. The room was unrecognizable. The twin bed was gone. The desk where I had studied for the LSATs during summer breaks was gone. The shelves that had held my debate trophies and my collection of vintage law books were gone. In their place was a showroom nursery. The walls had been painted a soft, buttery yellow. A massive, ornate crib stood in the center of the room, draped in sheer white netting. There was a changing table that cost more than my car, a rocking chair upholstered in velvet. Plush toys were arranged with military precision on floating shelves. It was beautiful, and it was a violation. It was not just that they had changed the room, it was that they had done it without telling me. They had done it while pretending this was still my home. And nowhere in this pristine, sterile space was a dusty wooden box or a stack of old notebooks. "My stuff," I whispered, the shock making my voice tremble. "Where is my stuff?" Sabrina stormed into the room behind me, her face twisted in a mask of pure fury. She was breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Get out!" she screamed. "Get out of my son's room!" I turned to face her. I was shaking, not with fear, but with a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. "Where's the box?" "Sabrina?" I asked. "Henry sent it here. Dad said he put it in my closet." "It is not your closet," she spat. "Look around you. Maria, does this look like it belongs to you? Nothing here belongs to you. You are a guest who has overstayed her welcome by about 10 years. Daniel appeared in the doorway, looking pale and terrified. "Sabrina, calm down," he pleaded, looking between us. "Maria, please, just come downstairs. We will talk about this." "I am not going anywhere until you tell me where my grandfather's things are," I said, standing my ground. Sabrina laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Your grandfather's things? You mean the trash he filled your head with? We got rid of it, all of it." "You what?" "The air left my lungs. We threw it out," she said, stepping closer to me, invading my personal space, old papers, useless junk, just like him. He was a senile old man who wasted his money on you, and now he is gone. And those things? They will not belong to you for long. In fact, Nothing is going to belong to you. The slip was subtle, but my lawyer's brain caught it instantly. They will not belong to you for long. That implied they still existed. That implied possession was being transferred. You are lying, I said. You kept them. You are hiding them because you know what is in them. Sabrina's eyes widened slightly, and I knew I had hit a nerve. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I am taking pictures, I said, raising the device. I am documenting that you have destroyed my property and repurposed this room without notice. No, Sabrina lunged. It happened in slow motion. I saw her hand dart out, not for the phone, but for my face. It was a feral, desperate movement. Her fingers tangled in my hair, yanking my head back with a force that made my neck snap. I cried out, stumbling backward. The phone clattered to the floor. You ungrateful little brat, she screamed. Then came the fist. It was clumsy, but it carried the weight of years of resentment. Her knuckles connected with my cheekbone, a burst of white-hot pain that exploded behind my eyes. I was not a fighter. I was a scholar. I was an investigator. I did not know how to slip a punch. The force of the blow sent me reeling. I lost my footing on the plush rug. I flailed, trying to grab onto something, anything, but my hands only found air. My head slammed into the wooden doorframe with a sickening crack. The world dissolved into static. Bright spots danced in my vision. I slid down the frame, hitting the floor hard. My vision swam, tilting sideways. I could taste copper in my mouth, blood. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, Daniel's voice, sounding like it was coming from underwater. Oh my God, Sabrina, what did you do? I blinked, trying to clear the fog in my brain. I looked up. Sabrina was standing over me, breathing heavily, clutching her own hand. She looked down at me not with remorse, but with defiance. She provoked me, Sabrina shouted, her voice shrill. You saw it. Daniel, she came at me. She was threatening the baby. I tried to push myself up, but the room spun violently. I collapsed back onto the carpet. Daniel knelt beside me, but he did not help me up. He did not check my pupils. He did not call an ambulance. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me, sending fresh waves of nausea through my skull. Maria, listen to me, he hissed, his face inches from mine. You need to stop this. Do not make a scene. Look what you made her do. You upset her. She is pregnant. For God's sake. I looked at him, my father, and saw him clearly for the first time. He was not just weak. He was complicit. He was watching his daughter bleed on the floor of a nursery, and his only concern was managing the narrative. You, I croaked, my voice slurring. You let her. Get up, Daniel ordered, trying to haul me to my feet by my arm. You are fine. You just slipped. We are going to go downstairs, and you are going to leave, and we are never going to talk about this. I pulled my arm away, wincing. The pain in my head was a throbbing drumbeat. I rolled onto my side, gasping for air. That was when I saw it. I was lying on the floor, my cheek pressed against the expensive wool rug. From this angle, I was looking up toward the ceiling of the hallway, just outside the bedroom door. Nestled in the corner of the crown molding was a small black dome, a security camera. Daniel had installed them years ago to protect his precious art collection. And there, blinking in the semi-darkness of the hallway, was a tiny red light. Blink, blink, blink. Sabrina had been so consumed by her rage, so eager to defend her territory, that she had forgotten the one thing Daniel loved more than his family, his security system. She had forgotten it was on. A cold realization washed over me, numbing the pain in my cheek. They thought they had won. They thought violence and gaslighting would silence me. They thought that because there were no witnesses, it would be her word against mine. But the red light blinked again, a steady rhythmic pulse in the shadows. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me for a moment. Holding on to that image, I was hurt. I was bleeding. I had lost my room, my heirlooms, and the last shred of illusion about my father. But as the red light burned into my memory, I knew one thing they did not. I had the truth, and now, somewhere on a hard drive in the basement, I had the proof. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed with a frequency that seemed to vibrate directly against the raw nerve endings in my skull. I was sitting on the edge of a paper-covered examination table, the crinkle of the sheet sounding like thunder in the quiet room. A nurse was carefully cleaning the dried blood from my cheek, her touch gentle, but every dab of the antiseptic stung like a fresh insult. Dr. Evans, a tired-looking man with kind eyes and a clipboard, stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at the bruising that was already blooming across my left cheekbone, turning the skin a violent shade of purple and black. He looked at the chart where he had noted the mild concussion. Then he looked at me. "Miss Crawford," he said, his voice low, "the nature of these injuries is consistent with an assault. The contusion on your cheek, the angle of the impact, the way you fell. This does not look like an accident." I remained silent, staring at the beige tiles on the floor. I was calculating. My head was throbbing, but the fog was lifting, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity that usually accompanied me to crime scenes. I was no longer just Maria, the daughter who wanted her grandfather's box. I was Maria, the investigator, assessing the damage. "Do you want me to call the police?" Dr. Evans asked. "We are mandatory reporters for certain types of violence, but in cases of domestic disputes involving adults, we often defer to the victim's preference unless there is an immediate threat to life. Do you want to file a report?" The question hung in the air. It was a pivot point. If I said yes, I triggered a machine I knew well. Police reports, interviews, the inevitable leakage to the press. If I said no, I preserved the silence that my family had always worshipped like a deity. Before I could answer, the curtain to my cubicle was whipped aside. Daniel Crawford stood there. He was still wearing the sweater from earlier, but now he looked disheveled, performing the role of the worried father with Oscar-worthy dedication. He rushed to the side of the bed, ignoring the doctor entirely. "Maria, thank God," he breathed. Reaching out to touch my arm, I flinched, pulling away sharply. His hand hovered in the air, then dropped. He turned to the doctor, his voice smooth, practiced, authoritative. "I am her father. Thank you for taking care of her. She's been under so much stress lately. The funeral was just a few days ago. She is not herself. She tripped on a rug in the hallway. It was a terrible accident." I watched him. I watched the way he effortlessly rewrote reality. He was not doing it to protect me. He was doing it to protect the timeline. He was doing it to ensure that the narrative of the happy, grieving family remained intact. "Is that true, Miss Crawford?" Dr. Evans asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Did you trip?" Daniel looked at me. His eyes were pleading, but underneath the desperation, there was a threat. "Do not do this," his eyes said. "Do not ruin us. We will take care of all the medical bills." "Obviously," Daniel said quickly, pulling out his wallet. "And we can get you into a private room. We just want to make sure she's comfortable." "Maria, honey, you do not want to make a fuss, right? Think about Sabrina. Think about the baby. Stress is so dangerous for her right now." He was using his unborn child as a human shield. He was banking on the fact that I had been trained, for 24 years, to be the good girl, to be the one who swallowed her pride to keep the peace, to be the one who cleaned up the mess. But the girl who cleaned up messes had died the moment Sabrina's fist connected with her face. I looked at the doctor. I sat up straighter, ignoring the wave of dizziness that washed over me. "No," I said. My voice was raspy, but it was steady. "That is not true." Daniel froze. The fake warmth drained from his face. "I did not trip," I said, enunciating every word. "I was struck in the face by Sabrina Crawford. I was then pushed, which caused me to fall and hit my head against a doorframe." "Maria," Daniel hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Think about what you are saying. This will destroy the family reputation." "The family reputation is not my client. Dad," I said, "I am." I turned back to Dr. Evans. "I want the medical record to reflect exactly what I just said. Cause of injury: blunt force trauma inflicted by another person. Please photograph the injuries for the file. And yes, I will be speaking to the police. But not tonight. Tonight, I just want everything documented." Daniel stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. He had never heard me say no. He had never seen me stand my ground when he applied pressure. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the daughter he had ignored was not the woman sitting on the hospital bed. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Crawford," Dr. Evans said, his tone shifting from professional to protective. Daniel looked at me one last time. It was a look of pure disappointment, the look a creator gives a tool that has broken in his hands. "You are making a mistake, Maria," he said. "You are choosing to be an enemy." "I chose nothing," I replied. "You made the choice when you watched her hit me and did nothing but check the carpet for bloodstains." He turned and walked out. The curtain swished shut behind him. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding, and my hands began to shake. The next 48 hours were a blur of pain management and cold calculation. I called my supervisor at the Northwind Integrity Bureau, Mariana Cole. I told her I needed to take a leave of absence. "Family emergency?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Something like that," I said. "I need to handle a legal matter. Personal." "Take the time," she said. "But Maria, you sound different. Watch your back." I hung up and went to the local police station in Lake Hollow. It was a waste of time, and I knew it before I even walked through the door. Lake Hollow was a town built on money and connections. Daniel Crawford was a donor to the Police Benevolent Fund. Sabrina chaired the annual charity gala. The officer at the desk, a man named Sergeant Miller, listened to my story with a look of polite skepticism. "It sounds like a domestic dispute, Miss Crawford," he said, leaning back in his chair. She said, "without witnesses, and considering Mrs. Crawford is, well, pregnant, it is going to be hard to prove intent. Are you sure you didn't just get into a shouting match and things got out of hand?" He was giving me an out. He was telling me to go home. "I am sure," I said, my voice icy. "I am filing the report for the record. I want a paper trail." He sighed, pushing a form across the counter. "Fine, fill it out. But do not expect a squad car to roll up to your father's house tonight." I did not expect that. I expected exactly this: inertia. Corruption in the suburbs is rarely about envelopes of cash passed in dark alleys. It is about people looking the other way because it is easier. It is about the assumption that nice people in big houses do not beat their stepdaughters. I went back to my apartment. It was a small, one-bedroom unit in the city, miles away from the manicured lawns of Lake Hollow. It was cluttered with books and case files, but it was mine. I sat at my desk, the only place I felt truly in control. I opened my laptop and logged into my email. I scrolled back through months of messages until I found the last few emails Henry had sent me. One of them, dated 3 weeks before he died, had the subject line, "The Box." "Maria," it read, "I have sent a wooden box to Daniel's house. I do not trust the mail to your apartment complex, and I want it to be safe. Inside are my journals from the bench, and a few documents I want you to have. They are important. They explain why I made the decisions I did. I told Daniel to put it in your room. Do not let him forget." I stared at the screen. Documents. Sabrina had said, "Those things will not belong to you for long." Why would she say that? If it was just old journals, why the hostility? Why the need to destroy the room, to paint over the past, to physically assault me when I tried to investigate? Violence is rarely the first option for people like Sabrina. Violence is what happens when the lies stop working. I closed my eyes, replaying the scene in the hallway, the fist, the fall, the taste of blood, and then the light. The blinking red light. My eyes snapped open. The camera. If I was right, that camera was part of a cloud-based system. Daniel was obsessed with security. He would have backups. But if I didn't act fast, they would delete it. They might have deleted it already. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Noah?" I said when he answered. "Maria? You sound terrible. I heard about the incident. Are you okay? I am fine, I said, cutting him off. I need a favor. A legal one. I need to draft a preservation letter immediately. I need to put Daniel and Sabrina on notice to preserve all surveillance footage from the interior of the Lake Hollow residence for the date of the incident, and I need it delivered by a process server within the hour. Whoa, Noah said. You are going to sue your father? I am going to destroy him, I said, but first, I need the tape. Noah paused. I could hear him shifting gears, moving from friend to lawyer. I will draft it. I will have it served. But Maria, if you do this, there is no going back. I am already gone. Noah, just send the letter. 3 days later, a courier arrived at my apartment. He handed me a thick envelope with the return address of Hale and Associates, Conrad Hale, my father's lawyer. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a letter, printed on heavy, cream-colored bond paper. It was couched in the polite, venomous language of high-end litigation. Dear Miss Crawford, our clients, Daniel and Sabrina Crawford, are deeply distressed by the recent events and your subsequent erratic behavior. However, they wish to resolve this matter privately, out of concern for your mental health and the family's standing. Enclosed is a settlement agreement. In exchange for a payment of $50,000, you agree to waive all claims regarding the alleged incident on October 14th. Furthermore, you agree to sign the attached waiver regarding the estate of Henry Lawson, accepting the settlement sum as full satisfaction of any and all inheritance rights. I stopped reading. $50,000. It was enough to pay off my student loans. It was enough to put a down payment on a house. For a girl who had just been beaten and humiliated, it was a tempting exit strategy. But my eyes drifted to the second paragraph. Waive all claims regarding the estate. Why? I had not seen Henry's will yet. Probate had not been opened. I assumed, like most people, that Henry had left the bulk of his estate to his only son, Daniel, with maybe a small token for me. That was the standard order of things. If I was only getting a token, why would they pay me $50,000 to waive it? You do not pay $50,000 to avoid a nuisance lawsuit. You pay $50,000 to hide $1 million. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind. The rush to renovate my room. The refusal to let me see the box. The comment that the items would not belong to me for long. The physical violence when I got too close. This was not just about a stepmother who hated me. This was about theft. Henry must have left me something big, maybe the house on Cedar Street, maybe his savings, whatever it was. Daniel and Sabrina knew about it. They had possession of the box that likely contained a copy of the will or instructions. They were trying to erase my claim before I even knew I had one. They thought I was just a hurt daughter. They thought I would take the money and run, grateful for the scraps. I looked at the settlement offer. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. It hurt my bruised cheek, but I didn't care. They had made a fatal error. They had shown their hand. By trying to buy my silence, they had confirmed that my silence was worth buying. I pushed the letter aside. I reached for a fresh legal pad. I uncapped a black pen. I was done being the victim. I was done being the sad girl waiting on the porch. I was an investigator for the Northwind Integrity Bureau, and I had just found my next target. At the top of the page, I wrote 3 lines. Case, Crawford vs. Crawford. Investigator, Maria Crawford. Objective, expose the truth. I underlined the last line twice. The ink was dark and permanent. I picked up my phone to call Noah back. The preservation letter was just the opening shot. It was time to declare war. The apartment was quiet, but my mind was a riot of noise. I had turned my dining table into a war room. Stacks of paper covered every inch of the wood, held down by coffee mugs and staplers. This was how I worked. This was how I brought down corrupt city councilmen and zoning board officials who thought they were untouchable. But this time, the names on the files were not strangers. They were my family. I started with the money. In my line of work, you always start with the money. People lie, they posture, they weep crocodile tears in courtrooms, but bank statements never lie. I had access to Henry's financial records because, years ago, he had given me power of attorney in case of a medical emergency. He had never revoked it, and while his accounts were now frozen pending probate, I still had the digital keys to look at the history. I logged into his primary checking account and began to scroll backward. Daniel always told the same story at Thanksgiving dinners. He would swirl his expensive scotch and say, "Your grandfather is a hard man. Maria, he never gave me a dime. I built everything I have from scratch. It was part of his mythos, the self-made man who overcame a stingy father." I filtered the search results for transfers to Daniel Crawford. The screen filled with rows. It started 15 years ago. On the first of every month, there was a transfer. In the beginning, it was modest, $2,000. Then, as Daniel's business ventures grew more ambitious and less successful, the numbers climbed. $4,000, $6,000. I opened a spreadsheet and started inputting the data. I went back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. I sat back, staring at the total sum at the bottom of the column. $720,000. My breath caught in my throat. That was not help. That was a second income. That was the price of a luxury home in a nice neighborhood. Henry had been bankrolling Daniel's lifestyle for over a decade, quietly, without ever asking for credit. And Daniel had taken every cent while looking me in the eye and telling me his father was a miser. Why did it stop? I looked at the dates. The transfer stopped abruptly 6 months ago. 6 months ago was when Henry's heart condition worsened. It was when he started talking to me about the end. It was also, I realized with a jolt, right around the time Daniel and Sabrina started renovations on the house in Lake Hollow. I moved to the next piece of the puzzle, the will. I knew Daniel had filed a will for probate immediately after the funeral. He was moving with suspicious speed. I called a contact of mine, a clerk named Sarah who worked in the probate division of the county court. "I need eyes on a filing." "Sarah," I had told her. "Crawford." She called me back an hour later. "It looks standard." "Maria," she said, "a will dated 2008. It splits the estate 50-50 between you and your father. He gets the real estate. You get the liquid assets up to a certain cap." 2008. I was a teenager then. That will made sense for the time. But Henry never let things sit. He was a judge. He updated his paperwork like he updated his case files. There was no way the last will he signed was from 15 years ago. I went back to Henry's digital archives. I searched for will, testament, estate. Nothing. Then I searched for the name of his personal attorney, a man named Arthur Pym. I found an email thread from 6 months ago. The subject line was, "Final revisions." I opened the attachment. It was a draft, a last will and testament, dated only 4 months prior to his death. I read the text, and my heart hammered against my ribs. I, Henry Lawson, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all prior wills. I scrolled down to the distribution of assets. To my son, Daniel Crawford, I leave the sum of $100,000, noting that he has received substantial financial support during my lifetime, totaling in excess of $700,000, which I consider his early inheritance. To my granddaughter, Maria Crawford, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the property on Cedar Street, my investment accounts, and my personal effects. I also appoint Maria Crawford as the sole executor of this will. There was a footnote, written in Henry's distinct, sharp voice, which he must have dictated to Arthur. I make this distinction not out of malice, but out of recognition. Maria was the only one present at my bedside when the room was quiet. Justice is about presence. They knew. Daniel and Sabrina knew this document existed. That was why they needed the box. That was why they destroyed my room. The original signed copy of this will must have been in that wooden box. By destroying the room and claiming the box was lost junk, they were trying to revert the estate back to the 2008 version. They were trying to steal everything. I printed the draft. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. This was fraud. This was a felony. But I was not done. The investigator in me was just waking up. I turned my attention to Sabrina. Sabrina Crawford. She appeared in my father's life 5 years ago. Perfectly coiffed and vaguely wealthy, though no one knew exactly where the money came from. She claimed she was in consulting. I ran a background check on Sabrina Crawford. Clean. Too clean. No parking tickets. No credit history prior to 2018. That is impossible, I whispered to the empty room. You do not get to 40 years old without a paper trail. She had changed her name. I started digging into marriage licenses in the tri-state area. I found the certificate for her marriage to Daniel. It listed her maiden name not as Miller, which she had told everyone, but as Vance. Sabrina Vance. I ran that name through the National Court database. Bingo. The screen lit up with hits. Pima County Superior Court, Arizona, Maricopa County Justice Court. I opened the first file. Estate of Thomas Vance versus Sabrina Vance. It was a contest of a will. The children of Thomas Vance, her previous husband, were suing her, claiming she had isolated their father in his final months and coerced him into changing his will. I opened the second file. Estate of Gerald O'Malley versus Sabrina Vance. This one was even older, a boyfriend. She had sued the estate claiming common-law marriage rights to get a payout. She was a professional. She was a black widow who didn't use poison. She used probate court. She found men who were emotionally weak or financially vulnerable, isolated them, and then harvested their assets. My father was not her husband. He was her mark. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of pity for Daniel, which was quickly extinguished by the memory of him watching me bleed. I went back to Henry's emails. I needed to know if he had suspected her. I searched for Sabrina. I found an email sent to Arthur Pym, dated 2 months before Henry died. Arthur, Henry wrote, I am worried about Daniel. He is not himself. She whispers in his ear, and he stops listening to reason. I tried to show him the bank transfer records to prove I have helped him, but he just looked at her for permission to speak. I fear my son loves his wife more than he loves the truth. Protect Maria. She is the only one who sees clearly. I stared at the screen, tears pricking my eyes. He had seen it. He had tried to warn Daniel, and Daniel had chosen the lie. My phone buzzed on the table, startling me. I looked at the screen. It was Noah. I picked up, Tell me you have good news. I have news, Noah said, his voice tight. I served the preservation letter. Hale called me 5 minutes later. He was screaming. He said we are harassing a pregnant woman and that the cameras in the hallway were malfunctioning that day. Malfunctioning? I repeated flatly. Of course they were. He says there is no footage. Maria, he claims the system was down for maintenance. I closed my eyes. I knew it. I knew they would wipe it. Without that video, it was my word against theirs. And they had the distraught pregnant mother angle locked down. We can still fight the will, I said. I found a draft of a newer will, and I found dirt on Sabrina. That is good, Noah said. But for the assault? Without the tape, it is an uphill battle. I hung up, feeling the weight of the defeat. I had the motive, I had the character evidence, but I didn't have the smoking gun. I sat there for an hour, watching the sun go down over the city skyline. My cheek throbbed. Then, my email pinged. It was a message from a generic Gmail account. The subject line was blank. I opened it. There was no text in the body of the email, just a video attachment and a single line of signature. I do not like being told to delete things that happened. I frowned. I moved the cursor over the attachment. It was a large file, MP4 format. I clicked play. The video was grainy, black and white, shot from a high angle. It showed the hallway outside my old bedroom. I saw myself walking toward the door. I saw Daniel trying to block me. I saw the tension in his shoulders. I saw myself open the door. I saw the shock on my face. Then I saw Sabrina storm into the frame. I watched, mesmerized by the silent horror of it. The camera had a microphone, but the audio was tinny. Get out of my son's room. Her voice sounded distorted, but distinct. I saw the argument. I saw myself holding up the phone. And then I saw it. The moment of truth. Daniel was standing 3 feet away. He was not looking at the floor. He was looking directly at Sabrina. When Sabrina lunged, Daniel did not step forward to stop her. He stepped back. He stepped back. I watched Sabrina grab my hair. I watched her fist connect with my face. I watched my body snap back and hit the door frame. I lay on the floor, motionless. Sabrina stood over me, heaving. And Daniel, my father? He looked at Sabrina. Then he looked up at the ceiling. He looked right at the camera lens. "Just stop, Sabrina. The camera is on," he said. He didn't say, "Oh God, are you okay?" He didn't say, "Stop hurting my daughter." He warned her about the surveillance. The email must have come from the security technician, the man Daniel paid to maintain the system. Sabrina must have ordered him to wipe the server, and he had done it, but he had kept a copy. Maybe he had a conscience. Maybe he just hated Sabrina. I watched the video again and again. Every time I watched Daniel step back, a piece of my heart hardened. It calcified into something sharp and unbreakable. I saved the file to my hard drive. I saved it to the cloud. I saved it to a thumb drive. I called Noah back. "Noah," I said, "do not file the response yet." "Why? What happened?" "I got the tape," I said. Silence on the other end. Then, a low whistle. "Is it bad?" "It is worse than bad. Noah, it is perfect." I looked at the image frozen on my screen. Sabrina with her fist raised. Daniel cowering in the background. And me, falling. They wanted to paint me as the villain. They wanted to say I was unstable, violent, and greedy. They thought they could erase 15 years of Henry's generosity and a lifetime of my father's neglect. I picked up my red pen. I pulled the notepad closer. Underneath objective, expose the truth. I wrote a new line. Strategy. Total annihilation. I looked at the scar on my face in the reflection of the computer monitor. It wasn't a mark of shame anymore. It was a receipt. They turned my room into a nursery and my life into a liability. I whispered to the empty room, "I am turning their lies into evidence." I closed the laptop. I was ready for court. If the assault in the hallway was a physical blow, what followed in the days after was a suffocating, orchestrated psychological siege. I had expected a legal fight. I had expected motions and filings. I had not expected a full-scale public relations campaign designed to erase my sanity before I even set foot in a courtroom. It started on a Tuesday, 3 days after I secured the video footage. I walked into a coffee shop near my apartment, craving caffeine and a moment of silence before heading to the bureau. The television in the corner was tuned to Wake Up Denver, a local morning talk show that usually featured segments on gardening or adoptable puppies. But that morning, the screen was filled with the soft, tear-stained face of Sabrina Crawford. She was sitting on a beige couch, holding a mug of tea with both hands, looking small and fragile. The chyron beneath her name read, "Mother-to-be speaks out on family trauma." I stood frozen in the line, watching the volume bars on the screen dance. "It is just so hard," Sabrina was saying, her voice trembling just enough to register as brave. "We tried to welcome her back. We wanted her to be part of the baby's life. But Maria, she has been struggling since her grandfather passed. She has these outbursts. We are just worried about her." The host, a woman with sympathetic eyes and hair sprayed into a helmet of concern, leaned in. "And you feel unsafe?" Sabrina looked down, touching her stomach. "I have to think about the baby first. When she came to the house that night, it was terrifying. I just hope she gets the help she needs. We are not pressing charges because we love her, but we cannot have that kind of volatility around a newborn." My blood ran cold. It was a masterclass in narrative spinning. She had taken the truth, that she had punched me, and inverted it so completely that she was the victim of my volatility. She was not pressing charges? That was a lie. She was not pressing charges because she knew I had the tape, but the public did not know that. To the public, she was a saintly stepmother showing mercy to a damaged stepchild. I bought my coffee, but I could not drink it. It tasted like ash. When I walked out of the shop, I passed a newsstand, the Rocky Plains Herald. A tabloid that masqueraded as a newspaper was displayed prominently. The headline screamed in bold, black font, "Stepmother fears for unborn child as troubled daughter spirals." There was a photo of me, taken from a distance, likely by a paparazzo hired by their PR firm. In the picture, I looked disheveled, my hair messy, my expression grim. It was taken yesterday when I was taking out my trash. Beside it was a studio portrait of Sabrina and Daniel, smiling, golden, and pregnant. The contrast was deliberate. The message was clear. One of these people belongs in polite society. The other belongs in a padded room. I arrived at the Northwind Integrity Bureau 20 minutes late. The office was usually a sanctuary of quiet focus, the sound of typing and ringing phones providing a familiar rhythm. Today, the silence felt heavy. As I walked to my cubicle, heads turned. Colleagues I had worked with for 3 years, people who had seen me build RICO cases against organized crime, averted their eyes. They had seen the paper. I sat down at my desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to focus on a file regarding a zoning kickback scheme, but the words swam on the page. Maria? I looked up. It was the administrative assistant, looking uncomfortable. "Director Cole wants to see you. Now." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. I walked the long hallway to the corner office, feeling like I was walking to the gallows. Mariana Cole was a legend in the state investigation circuit. She was a woman who did not smile unless she had an indictment in her hand. She sat behind her glass desk, her posture rigid. On the desk, folded neatly, was a copy of the Rocky Plains Herald. "Sit down, Maria," she said. Her voice was neutral, stripped of its usual warmth. I sat. "Your father was here this morning," she said. The air left my lungs. Daniel, he had come here. He had invaded the one space I had carved out entirely for myself. "He was very polite," Mariana continued, picking up a silver pen and turning it over in her fingers. "He was very well dressed. He told me he was deeply concerned about your mental state. He mentioned that the stress of the job, combined with your grandfather's death, has made you erratic. He suggested that for the safety of the Bureau's reputation, and for your own health, we should place you on administrative leave." I gripped the arms of the chair. The room spun slightly. This was not just a family spat. This was a surgical strike on my credibility. If I lost my job, I lost my resources, I lost my standing. I became exactly what they said I was: a jobless, unstable woman with a vendetta. "He is lying," I said. My voice was steady, but it cost me everything to keep it that way. Mariana looked at me. She looked at the bruise on my cheek, which I had covered with concealer, but which was still visible under the harsh office lights. "I have known you for 3 years. Crawford," she said, "you are the most meticulous investigator I have. You do not spiral. You dig." She leaned forward. "But I run an integrity bureau. We cannot have headlines like this attached to our agents. It compromises our cases. Defense attorneys will use this to impeach your testimony. So, I am going to ask you once, and I want the absolute truth. Is there anything in that article that is factually true?" I looked her in the eye. I decided to trust her, not as a boss, but as a seeker of truth. "No," I said. "The truth is that my stepmother assaulted me when I discovered they had misappropriated my grandfather's estate. I have video evidence of the assault. I have financial records proving the theft. I am suing them." Mariana stared at me for a long moment. She was reading my face, looking for the twitch of a lie. She did not find one. She let out a short, sharp breath and tossed the pen onto the desk. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I repeated. "If you are suing them, then this is a legal strategy on their part," she said, her analytical mind kicking in. "They are trying to discredit you before you take the stand. It is a classic maneuver. Disgusting, but classic." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. "I cannot stop the press, Maria, and I cannot stop people from whispering, but I can tell you this: as long as you keep your side of the street clean, as long as everything you do is within the bounds of the law. You have a job here. I do not let suspects dictate who I employ." She turned back to me. "But be careful. If they are willing to come to your workplace, they are scared, and scared people are dangerous." I walked out of her office feeling a strange mixture of relief and fury. Daniel had tried to cut my legs out from under me, and he had failed. But the war was escalating. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Noah. "Come to my office," he said. "We just got served." Noah's office was in a converted brick warehouse downtown. It smelled of old books and coffee. When I arrived, he was pacing, a thick stack of documents in his hand. "They are not just defending the will contest," he said, tossing the papers onto his desk. "They are going on the offensive." I picked up the top sheet, Emergency Motion for Temporary Conservatorship. I felt the blood drain from my face. Conservatorship. It was the nuclear option. It was what you did for an elderly parent with dementia, or a child who could not care for themselves. "They are arguing that you are mentally incompetent," Noah explained, his voice hard. "They are using the police report you filed against you. Claiming it was a delusional episode, they are using the article in the Herald. They are citing anonymous family friends who claim you have been threatening self-harm. They want the court to appoint Daniel as the conservator of your estate until you are stabilized." "If they win this," I started. "If they win," Noah finished, "Daniel gets control of your finances. He gets control of your legal decisions. He can dismiss the lawsuit against himself. He can bury the video. He can force you into treatment. It is a hostile takeover of your life." I sank into the leather chair. The walls felt like they were closing in. It was terrifyingly smart. They did not have to prove they were innocent of theft. They just had to prove I was too crazy to accuse them. "But there is more," Noah said. He pulled a second envelope from his briefcase. This came with the motion. "It is a settlement offer from Conrad Hale." I took the letter. It was short. "To resolve all pending matters and to avoid the necessity of a public competency hearing that would further damage Miss Crawford's reputation, our clients offer the sum of $200,000. Conditions: Ms. Crawford will withdraw all claims regarding the estate of Henry Lawson. Ms. Crawford will sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the events of October 14th. Ms. Crawford will surrender all copies of any video or audio recordings obtained from the Lake Hollow residence. $200,000. I stared at the number. It was 4 times the original offer. It was enough to pay off my student loans instantly. It was enough to buy a small condo. It was enough to walk away. I closed my eyes. I could see the alternative. The competency hearing would be brutal. They would drag out every mistake I had ever made. They would interview my ex-boyfriends. They would subpoena my therapy records from when Ruth died. They would humiliate me on a public stage. Taking the money meant safety. It meant the headlines stopped. It meant Daniel and Sabrina went back to their mansion, and I went back to my quiet life. For a moment, just a terrifying, weak moment, I considered it. I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of fighting a battle where the other side had all the money and no morals. "Maria," Noah said softly. I looked up. He was watching me closely. "I am not going to tell you what to do," he said. $200,000 is real money, and this fight is going to get ugly. They have already shown they will go after your job and your sanity." He leaned back against his desk, crossing his arms. "But before you answer, I want to ask you one question. What do you want most from this case? Is it the inheritance? Is it the money?" I looked down at the check. I thought about the money. Then I thought about Henry. I thought about the years he sat in the front row of my school plays while Daniel's seat was empty. I thought about the ledger he kept, tracking every dollar he gave Daniel, not out of pettiness, but out of a desire for truth. I thought about the draft of the will where he called me the only one who was present. If I took the money, I was selling Henry out. I was agreeing that Daniel's version of history was the true one. I was agreeing that I was the crazy one, and they were the benevolent benefactors paying me to go away. I looked at the video file icon on Noah's computer screen, the image of my father stepping back while his wife hit me. They hurt me, I said, my voice quiet. Yes, Noah said. They stole from Henry, I continued. Yes. And now they are trying to tell the world that I am the problem because I noticed. I stood up, I picked up the settlement offer, I tore it in half, then I tore the halves again. The sound of the ripping paper was the loudest thing in the room. I do not want their money. Noah, I said. What do you want? He asked. I looked him dead in the eye. I want them to never use the word family as a weapon again. I want to strip them of the ability to hide behind that word. I want a judge to look at them and see thieves, not parents. Noah smiled. It was a grim, sharp smile. Then we are not accepting the settlement, he said. No, I said. We are filing the countersuit, and we are filing it publicly. We are going to attach the forensic accounting of the stolen $700,000. We are going to attach the affidavit from the Arizona court cases proving Sabrina is a serial fraudster, and we are going to attach a still frame from that video. It will be a circus, Noah warned. The press will eat you alive before the trial even starts. They will escalate the smear campaign. Let them, I said. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street. I imagined Daniel and Sabrina in their high tower in Lake Hollow, drinking wine, thinking they had checkmated me with their PR blitz and their conservatorship motion. They thought the shame would break me. They thought I would hide from the spotlight. File it, Noah, I said, turning back to him. File everything. If they want a show, let us give them one, but let us make sure the lights are bright enough to show the dirt under their fingernails. I walked out of his office and into the cool evening air. The wind hit my face, stinging my eyes. I felt exposed. I felt vulnerable. But for the first time since the attack, I did not feel like a victim. I was walking into the fire. Yes, but I was bringing the matches. The morning of the trial. The air in courtroom 3 was thick enough to choke on. Usually, civil proceedings regarding probate and restraining orders were dry. Dusty affairs attended only by the lawyers and the aggrieved parties. But Conrad Hale and the expensive public relations firm hired by my stepmother had done their work well. The gallery was packed. There were reporters from the local papers, bloggers who covered high society gossip, and a distressing number of Lake Hollow residents who treated the legal destruction of a family as a spectator sport. They sat in the back rows, whispering behind cupped hands, their eyes darting between the plaintiff's table, where Daniel and Sabrina sat like royalty in exile, and the defense table, where I sat like a criminal. I kept my hands folded on the table in front of me. I kept my spine rigid. I wore a navy blue suit, the kind I would wear to interview a hostile witness. I wanted to look professional, but as I felt the weight of 50 pairs of eyes boring into the back of my neck, I realized that to them, my professionalism looked like coldness. My silence looked like guilt. Noah leaned over, his voice low. Do not react, he whispered. No matter what they say, if you roll your eyes, you are disrespectful. If you cry, you are unstable. If you get angry, you prove their point. Be a statue, Maria. I nodded. I could be a statue. I had practiced being a statue at the dinner table for 15 years while my father ignored me. Judge Hart entered the courtroom. The bailiff called for order. The room shuffled to its feet and then settled back down, the rustle of fabric sounding like a collective intake of breath. Conrad Hale stood up for his opening statement. He walked to the center of the floor, buttoning his jacket. He did not look like a lawyer. He looked like a grieving uncle. He looked at the jury box. Though this was a bench trial, he was performing for the court of public opinion as much as for Judge Hart, and he sighed. Your Honor, he began, his voice rich with manufactured sorrow. This is not a case about money. It is not a case about houses or heirlooms. It is a tragedy about a family trying to survive the erratic, dangerous spiral of a daughter they tried desperately to save. He turned and pointed a manicured finger at me. Maria Crawford is a brilliant woman, he said. No one denies that. But brilliance often walks hand in hand with instability. You will hear testimony today that Ms. Crawford, driven by a lifelong jealousy of her stepmother and a resentment toward her father, manipulated her dying grandfather into altering his will in his final days. And when that manipulation was threatened, when she realized her father and stepmother were building a new life with a new baby, she resorted to violence. He paused for effect. You will hear how she broke into their home, how she screamed at a pregnant woman, how she physically attacked Sabrina Crawford, risking the life of an unborn child, all because she could not handle the fact that she was no longer the center of her father's world. We are here to ask the court for protection. We are here to say that enough is enough. I sat there, my face a mask of granite. Inside, I was screaming, broke into their home? I had a key. Screamed? I had barely raised my voice until she hit me. But the narrative was compelling. It was simple. The wicked, jealous stepdaughter, the saintly, persecuted new wife. Sabrina was the first witness called. She walked to the stand slowly, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting protectively on her stomach. She wore a soft gray dress that made her look younger, more vulnerable. She took the oath in a trembling voice. When Conrad asked her to describe the events of October 14th, Sabrina closed her eyes, letting a single, perfect tear slide down her cheek. I was just so scared, she whispered into the microphone. Maria came in. She was frantic. Her eyes were wild. She started screaming about a box, about money. I tried to calm her down. I told her, Maria, please, think of the baby. She stopped, reaching for a tissue. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. And what did she do? Conrad asked gently. She shoved me. Sabrina sobbed. She shoved me right into the doorframe. She hit my stomach. I was so terrified I would lose the baby. I screamed for Daniel. I didn't know what she would do next. I felt Noah's hand grip my arm under the table. It was a warning. Stay still. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. It was a lie so bold, so horrific, that it took my breath away. She was describing exactly what she had done to me, but she had inverted the roles. She was stealing my trauma and wearing it as a costume. Conrad let her cry for a moment before continuing. Mrs. Crawford, have you ever felt unsafe around Maria before? Sabrina nodded, dabbing at her eyes. Always. There is a darkness in her. She stares at me. She makes comments. We tried to include her, but she hates us. She hates that we are happy. When Noah stood up for cross-examination, the room was hostile. He tried to chip away at her story. He asked about the layout of the room. He asked about the lack of medical records for her alleged injuries. Mrs. Crawford, Noah said, his voice calm. You claim Ms. Crawford hit you in the stomach. Did you seek medical attention that night? I was in shock, Sabrina snapped, her vulnerability vanishing for a split second before she recovered. I just wanted her out of the house. My husband checked me. We monitored the baby's movement. We didn't want to drag the police into it unless we had to. So you were assaulted, allegedly risking the life of your unborn child, and your reaction was to not call 911? Noah pressed. We wanted to protect her, Sabrina wailed, looking at the judge. We are family. It was a brilliant performance. By refusing to answer the logic and pivoting to emotion, she made Noah look like a bully. Judge Hart watched her over the rim of her glasses. Her expression was unreadable, but I saw a tiny flicker of something, a tightening of her jaw, when Sabrina's wail went on just a second too long. Judge Hart had seen real victims. She knew the rhythm of trauma. Sabrina's rhythm was just a little too perfect, a little too rehearsed. But the damage was done. When Sabrina stepped down, I could feel the waves of disgust rolling off the gallery. Then they called Daniel. If Sabrina's testimony was a knife to the gut, Daniel's was a slow poison. He sat in the witness box, looking every inch the tortured patriarch. He looked tired. He looked sad. He looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment that made me want to vanish. Mr. Crawford, Conrad said, tell us about your relationship with your daughter. I love Maria, Daniel said. I have always tried to give her the best, private schools, cars, I wanted her to have everything I didn't have. And how did she respond to that? Daniel sighed. She was difficult after her grandmother died, so. He paused, looking down at his hands. Go on, Conrad urged. She changed, Daniel said. She became angry, violent. I remember when she was 14. She threw a vase across the room because I was 5 minutes late to pick her up. She would scream at me for hours. She has always had this rage, unprovoked rage. I stared at him. The vase incident. I remembered it. I was 14. He wasn't 5 minutes late. He was 3 hours late. He had missed my science fair presentation. I had been crying, and I had knocked a vase off the table by accident when I ran to my room. He was taking the clumsy grief of a neglected child and twisting it into the profile of a sociopath. Was there any other evidence of this instability? Conrad asked. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Conrad took it and submitted it to the court. These are records from her therapy sessions when she was 13. Daniel said, after her grandmother Ruth passed, we were very worried about her. The therapist noted she had abandonment issues, aggressive outbursts. Noah jumped up. Objection. Relevance? These are privileged medical records from over a decade ago. Goes to state of mind and a history of behavioral patterns. Your Honor, Conrad argued smoothly. The defense is claiming Ms. Crawford is a rational investigator. We are establishing that she is, and has always been, a volatile individual prone to lashing out at family members. Judge Hart looked at the documents. I will allow it, but with limited scope, she ruled. I felt naked. They were reading the notes of a grief counselor who had tried to help a 13-year-old girl process the death of the only mother figure she ever had. They were weaponizing my grief. They were taking the worst year of my life and using it to prove I was a monster. Daniel continued, his voice gaining confidence. When she came to the house that night, it was like seeing that teenager again. She was irrational. She was screaming about money, about the will. She went after Sabrina. I tried to stop her, but she was out of control. And the fall? Conrad asked. How did she get that bruise on her face? She tripped, Daniel said. He looked me right in the eye when he said it. She lunged at Sabrina, missed, and fell into the doorframe. It was her own momentum. The room was silent. Daniel Crawford, the pillar of the community, had spoken. He had confirmed his wife's story. He had provided a backstory of mental illness. He had painted a picture so complete, so damning, that I almost believed it myself. Noah tried to cross-examine him. He asked about the bank transfers. He asked about the missing box. Mr. Crawford, Noah asked, is it not true that you received over $700,000 from your father over the last 15 years? Daniel scoffed. My father invested in my businesses. That was capital. It wasn't an allowance. And what does that have to do with Maria attacking my wife? It goes to motive. Mr. Crawford, Noah said, motive for you to lie. I do not need to lie, Daniel spat. I am the victim here. My wife is the victim. My daughter needs help, not a lawsuit. When court adjourned for the day, I felt like I had been flayed alive. I packed my briefcase with numb fingers. I could hear the murmurs from the gallery. Did you hear about the therapy? She sounds dangerous. Poor man. Imagine having a daughter like that. I walked out of the courtroom, Noah flanking me like a bodyguard. The hallway was a gauntlet of flashing cameras. Ms. Crawford, did you hit her? Maria, do you have a comment on the therapy records? Are you seeking treatment? I kept my head down. I walked to Noah's car, the flashes blinding me. I did not say a word. I did not cry. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment. The lights were off. The only illumination came from the television screen. The local news was on. The anchor, a man with a grim expression, was recapping the day's events. Testimony began today in the shocking Crawford family lawsuit. He said, Sabrina Crawford, a beloved community fundraiser, took the stand in tears, describing a harrowing attack by her stepdaughter. Maria Crawford. Sources say the defense is struggling to explain Maria's history of instability, which dates back to her teenage years. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Beloved community fundraiser takes stand against violent stepdaughter." I looked at the image on the screen. It was Sabrina, leaving the courthouse, looking brave and tragic. Then they flashed a picture of me, looking stony and cold. They had done it. They had successfully turned the narrative upside down. To the world, I was the villain. I was the ungrateful, violent, mentally unstable daughter who attacked a pregnant woman out of greed. I stood up and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the light. I looked at myself in the mirror. The bruise on my cheek had faded to a dull yellow, barely visible anymore. The physical evidence was healing, but the wound they had inflicted today, the public stripping of my character, the betrayal of my history, was fresh and bleeding. I touched the glass, right over my reflection's eye. They told a good story. I whispered to the empty room. It had drama. It had tears. It had a villain. But it had one flaw. It wasn't true. And unlike them, I didn't need to perform. I didn't need to fake tears or twist the memories of a dead woman. I walked back to the living room. I looked at my laptop, where the video file was queued up, ready for tomorrow. Day 1 was theirs. They had fired all their ammunition. They had used the therapy records. They had used the tears. They had used the gaslighting. They had nothing left. I turned off the TV, silencing the anchor's voice. Tomorrow, I said to the darkness, tomorrow, it is my turn. And the truth does not need to shout to be heard. It just needs to be seen. I went to bed, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. I slept with the heavy, absolute peace of a soldier who knows that the ammunition is loaded, the target is acquired, and the trigger is ready to be pulled. Day 2 of the trial began with a shift in atmospheric pressure. If the first day had been a theater performance of emotion and hearsay, the second day was an anatomy lesson. We were about to strip back the skin of their lies and show the court exactly what kind of rot was festering underneath. The gallery was still full, but the mood had changed. The whispers were louder, more skeptical. The headline from yesterday, painting me as the villain, hung over the room like a dark cloud. But I walked in with my head high. I knew what was in Noah's briefcase. They had spent yesterday telling stories. Today, we were going to show facts. Our first witness was Dr. Evans, the emergency room physician who had treated me the night of the attack. He walked to the stand with the weary, no-nonsense gait of a man who spent his nights stitching up bar fights and car crash victims. He had no patience for the polished, expensive air of Conrad Hale. Noah walked him through his credentials and then put the medical report on the overhead projector. "Dr. Evans," Noah said, "can you describe the injuries Ms. Crawford presented with on the night of October 14th? She had a significant contusion on her left cheekbone, swelling around the eye socket, and a laceration on the back of her scalp consistent with an impact against a hard, angular surface," Dr. Evans recited, reading from his own notes. She also exhibited signs of a mild concussion. "Mr. Crawford testified yesterday that his daughter tripped and fell." Noah said, "In your professional medical opinion, are these injuries consistent with a simple fall?" Dr. Evans shook his head. "No. A fall usually results in injuries to the hands or knees, as the person attempts to break their impact, or, if they hit their face, the bruising is diffuse. Ms. Crawford had a very specific point of impact on her cheek. It was concentrated, blunt force. It was consistent with being struck by an object, or a fist." The word fist hung in the air. I saw Sabrina stiffen in her chair. "And regarding her state of mind?" Noah asked. "The plaintiffs have suggested Ms. Crawford was erratic, perhaps under the influence or having a manic episode." "Absolute nonsense," Dr. Evans said, his voice sharp. "I ran a full toxicology screen, which is standard for head trauma. Her blood alcohol level was 0. Her drug screen was negative. She was lucid, calm, and oriented. She was in pain, certainly, and she was frightened, but she was perfectly rational. She asked for her injuries to be documented specifically because she stated she had been assaulted." "Thank you, Doctor." Conrad Hale tried to cross-examine, asking if it was possible to get such a bruise from falling onto a doorknob, but Evans shut him down with a look of scientific disdain. By the time the doctor stepped down, the image of me as a drunken, stumbling maniac was beginning to crack. But we were just getting started. Next, Noah called a witness that neither Daniel nor Sabrina expected to see. When the bailiff announced the name Kevin Henderson, I saw Daniel's head snap toward the doors. Kevin was a man in his 30s wearing a generic polo shirt and holding a ball cap in his hands. He looked nervous to be in court, but there was a stubborn set to his jaw. "Mr. Henderson," Noah said, "what is your occupation?" "I own Henderson Security Solutions." Kevin said, "We do high-end residential installs, alarms, cameras, smart locks." "And you are the contractor for the Crawford residence in Lake Hollow?" "Yes, sir. For about 5 years." Noah walked to the center of the room. "Did you receive a call from Mrs. Sabrina Crawford on the morning of October 15th, the day after the alleged incident?" "I did," Kevin said. He refused to look at the plaintiff's table. "What was the nature of that call?" "She told me the system was acting up." Kevin said, "She said she wanted me to come out and perform a hard reset. She specifically asked if a hard reset would wipe the drive history for the previous 24 hours. A murmur rippled through the gallery. This was not a malfunction. This was a purge. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her yes, it would," Kevin replied. "She told me to come over immediately and do it. She said they wanted a fresh start for the new baby." "And did you?" Noah asked. "I went over there," Kevin said, "and I wiped the main server at the house, like she asked." Sabrina let out a small, audible breath of relief. "But," Kevin continued, raising his voice slightly, "I did not feel right about it. I knew the police had been called to the house the night before because I listened to the scanner. It seemed fishy. So before I wiped the local drive, I pulled a remote backup of the hallway feed to my cloud server, just in case." The relief on Sabrina's face vanished, replaced by a look of pure, white-hot panic. Daniel turned to her, his eyes wide. "And do you have that footage with you today?" Noah asked. "Yes, sir," Kevin said. "I sent it to Ms. Crawford's legal team as soon as I realized she was being sued. I do not like being part of a cover-up." "Your Honor," Noah said. Turning to the bench, "We move to enter Defense Exhibit C into evidence. CCTV footage from the Crawford residence, dated October 14th. "Objection!" Conrad Hale was on his feet, his face flushed. "We have not had time to authenticate this. This is an ambush." "You were served with the evidence list 3 days ago. Mr. Hale," Judge Hart said coldly, "you chose not to review the digital files. Overruled. Play the tape." The courtroom lights were dimmed. A large screen dropped down from the ceiling. The projector hummed to life. For a moment, the image was grainy. Then it sharpened. There was the hallway. There was the door to my old room. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. On the screen, I walked toward the door. Daniel tried to block me. I stepped around him. Then came the moment. The door opened. I stood there, shocked. Sabrina stormed into the frame, even without sound. Her body language was screaming aggression. She got in my face. I held up my phone. Then, the strike. It was brutal on the big screen. You could see the torque of her body as she swung. You could see my head snap back. You could see me crumple against the doorframe and slide to the floor. Gasps erupted from the gallery. It was not a shove. It was not a stumble. It was a hook. But Noah let the tape run. Sabrina stood over me, heaving, and then Daniel stepped into the frame. The audio, tinny but audible, filled the room. "Just stop. Sabrina, the camera is on." The voice was Daniel's. It was undeniable. He did not rush to help me. He did not check for a pulse. He looked at the camera lens and warned his wife that she was being recorded. Judge Hart froze the frame right there. Daniel looking up at the ceiling. Sabrina looking down at me with hate in her eyes. Sabrina stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "That is not the whole tape," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "She provoked me. She threatened my baby. You cut the part where she threatened me." "Sit down, Mrs. Crawford." Judge Hart slammed her gavel down, the sound like a gunshot. "She is lying," Sabrina screamed, pointing at the screen. "That video is doctored." "Bailiff, remove Mrs. Crawford if she speaks out of turn again," Judge Hart ordered. Her eyes were blazing. "The video is admitted, and the court notes the plaintiff's outburst." Sabrina sank back into her chair, trembling, but it was over. The fearful mother mask had slipped, and underneath was the snarling woman from the video. Daniel sat with his head in his hands. He could not look at the screen. He knew what that sentence, "the camera is on," meant. It meant he wasn't a bystander. He was an accomplice. Noah turned off the projector. The lights came back up, revealing a room that had fundamentally changed. The reporters were typing furiously. The people in the back row who had glared at me yesterday were now looking at Sabrina with open revulsion. "We are not done, Your Honor," Noah said. He called our next witness, Dr. Marcus Aris, a forensic accountant. If the video destroyed their moral defense, Aris was about to destroy their legal one. Dr. Aris set up a tripod with a large chart. It was a timeline, color-coded in red and black. "Dr. Aris," Noah said, "you have analyzed the financial records of the late Henry Lawson?" "I have," Dr. Aris said. "Specifically, I looked for transfers of assets to Daniel Crawford over the last 15 years. "And what did you find?" "I found a consistent pattern of monthly transfers, ranging from $2,000 to $10,000. Dr. Aris explained, using a laser pointer to trace the jagged red line climbing up the chart. These transfers often coincided with periods where Mr. Crawford's business entities were posting losses. "Can you give us a total?" Noah asked. "The total sum transferred from Henry Lawson to Daniel Crawford between the years 2008 and 2023 is $724,500. Dr. Aris stated. A low whistle came from somewhere in the back of the room. $724,000, Noah repeated. "And was this a loan?" "There is no paperwork indicating a loan." "Dr. Aris said, "No repayment schedule, no interest. In the memos of the checks, Mr. Lawson frequently wrote gift or support." Noah turned to the jury box, or rather, the empty space where a jury would be, addressing the judge directly. "Your Honor, the plaintiff argues that the new will, which leaves the bulk of the remaining estate to Maria Crawford, is unfair and the result of undue influence. However, the math tells a different story. The value of the remaining estate is approximately $800,000. If you add the $724,000 Daniel Crawford already received, the division of assets is almost exactly 50-50. He paused, letting the logic sink in. Henry Lawson did not disinherit his son. Noah said, he simply recognized that he had already paid him his share. The new will was not an act of malice, it was an act of accounting. Daniel looked up. His face was pale. The narrative of the greedy daughter stealing the inheritance had just evaporated. Henry wasn't senile, he was fair. He had been supporting Daniel for 15 years, and Daniel had tried to take the rest anyway. But Noah had one final nail for the coffin. Your Honor, Noah said, we have one final piece of evidence regarding the character and credibility of the plaintiff, Sabrina Crawford. Conrad Hale stood up, looking defeated. Objection. Character evidence is... We are establishing a pattern of conduct, Noah interrupted. A pattern of fraud and litigation abuse. Judge Hart waved her hand. Proceed. Noah pulled a file from his briefcase. The defense would like to introduce certified court records from the state of Arizona, Noah said, specifically, records from Pima County Superior Court regarding the estate of Thomas Vance. Sabrina flinched as if she had been slapped. In 2018, a woman named Sabrina Vance, now known as Sabrina Crawford, contested the will of her late husband, claiming his children had manipulated him. She used the exact same language she has used in this court. She claimed she was fearful, She claimed the children were unstable. Noah held up another file. And again in 2015, the estate of Gerald O'Malley. Sabrina Vance sued for a spousal share, claiming common law marriage. Noah walked to the table and placed the files in front of the judge. This is not a grieving mother protecting her family. Your Honor, Noah said, his voice ringing with quiet power. This is a professional predator who changes her name and her target, but never her tactics. She isolates the men, alienates the children, and then uses the court system to extract maximum value. The courtroom erupted. This time, the judge did not bang her gavel immediately. She let the noise wash over the room. She let the truth settle into the wood of the benches. I looked at Sabrina. She was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of frozen porcelain. Her hands were gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears didn't work when the audience knew the script. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at his wife. He was looking at her not with love or protection, but with a dawning, horrifying realization. He was realizing that he was just another file in a stack, just another Thomas Vance, just another Gerald O'Malley. He had betrayed his father and his daughter for a woman who saw him as a paycheck. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was relief. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted off my lungs. The reporters were practically running out of the room to file their updates. I could hear the frantic tapping of keys. Twist and Crawford case. Stepmother's past revealed. The tape tells all. Judge Hart looked down at the files. She looked at the video freeze frame still lingering on the screen. Then she looked at me. For the first time in 2 days, her eyes were soft. It was a look of recognition. She saw me, not the monster they created, but the granddaughter Henry Lawson had raised. We will recess for lunch, Judge Hart said. As the room cleared, Noah turned to me and smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in 48 hours. We got them, he whispered. I looked across the aisle. Daniel was trying to talk to Conrad Hale, but Hale was packing his bag with aggressive speed, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Sabrina was sitting alone, ignoring Daniel, scrolling through her phone with manic intensity, likely watching her social media support evaporate in real time. They are starting to see them the way Henry did, I said softly. I touched the scar on my hairline. It didn't hurt anymore. Let us go get some lunch. Noah, I said, I have a feeling the afternoon session is going to be very short. I stood up and walked out of the courtroom. This time, when the cameras flashed, I didn't look down. I looked right into the lens. I wanted them to see my face. I wanted them to see the face of the woman who had just brought down the house of cards. The afternoon sun was slanting through the high windows of the courtroom, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. The frenetic energy of the morning session, fueled by the video and the financial charts, had dissipated into a heavy, expectant silence. We had proven the fraud. We had proven the assault. But Noah looked at me with a seriousness that told me we were not done. The law deals in facts, but people vote with their hearts, and a judge is still a person. We had won the logic war. Now, we had to win the war for the narrative. Noah leaned in close. Maria, he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Are you ready to take the stand? Not just as the victim of an assault, not just as the plaintiff, but as the person who lived this history. Are you ready to tell the whole story? I looked across the aisle. Daniel was staring at his hands, refusing to meet my gaze. Sabrina was whispering furiously to Conrad Hale, her face a mask of panic. I looked up at the judge's bench, where Henry used to sit in a different courtroom, in a different time. I nodded. I am ready. Noah stood up. The defense calls Maria Crawford. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking the length of a football field. I could feel every eye in the room on me, the reporters, the curious onlookers, the court staff, but strangely, my hands were not shaking. The fear I had felt in the hallway, the humiliation I had felt when the article came out, it was all gone. I took the oath, my voice clear and steady. Noah approached the podium. He did not bring a notepad. He did not look like a lawyer preparing to extract testimony. He looked like a friend asking a question. "Maria," Noah said gently, "tell us about the house on Cedar Street." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, and I was there. "It was a small house," I began. "It was painted yellow, and the porch needed painting every 2 years because the Colorado sun was harsh. It smelled like cinnamon toast and old law books. It was where my grandparents, Ruth and Henry, raised me." "And your father?" Noah asked. "Daniel Crawford?" I opened my eyes and looked at Daniel. "He was a visitor," I said. "He was a man who came in a shiny car for an hour at a time. He was a collection of brief, frantic moments. He was always checking his watch. He was always leaving." Noah nodded. "Can you describe your relationship with him growing up?" I did not want to sound angry. Anger is cheap. I wanted to be precise. "It was a relationship defined by empty spaces." I said, "I remember my high school graduation. I was the valedictorian. I gave a speech. I looked out into the front row, and I saw Ruth and Henry. They were holding hands, beaming. Next to them was an empty metal folding chair. My father had promised he would be there. He sent a text message 10 minutes before the ceremony started. Something about a flight delay from Chicago." I paused. The room was silent. "I remember my 16th birthday," I continued. "I sat on the porch swing until midnight waiting for his car. It never came. The next day, a courier delivered a laptop. There was no card, just a receipt in the box." Conrad Hale shifted in his seat, but he did not object. There was nothing legally objectionable about the truth. "My grandfather, Henry, used to tell me something at the dinner table." I said, looking at Judge Hart, "We would eat the stew Ruth made, and he would talk about his cases. He would say, 'Maria, justice does not start in a marble building. Justice starts at home. It starts with keeping your word to the people who rely on you.'" I saw Judge Hart nod slightly. She knew Henry. She knew that sounded exactly like him. Noah moved closer. "Let us talk about the end. Maria, tell us about the night Henry died." My throat tightened. This was the memory I held most sacred, and exposing it felt like cutting open a vein. "I was the only one there," I said, my voice dropping to a hush. It was 3 a.m. The hospital room was quiet. The machines were beeping. That slow, rhythmic sound that counts down the seconds. Daniel had gone home to sleep because he said the hospital chairs hurt his back. Sabrina never came. I took a breath. Henry woke up for a moment. He was weak. He could barely squeeze my hand. He pulled me close, and he whispered to me. He said, "Do not let them make you guilty for speaking the truth." I let the words hang in the air. "He knew," I said, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. He knew what they were. He knew that once he was gone, I would be the only thing standing between his legacy and their greed. That was his final instruction to me. Not about money, not about the house. It was about the truth. Noah let the silence stretch. Then, he shifted gears. "Let us go to October 14th, he said. "The night you went to the Lake Hollow house. The night you were assaulted." I straightened my back. "I went there to get a wooden box." I said, "A box my grandfather told me was mine." When I arrived, the house felt different, hostile. When I asked to go to my room, my father stopped me. "What did he say?" Noah asked. He said, "That is not your room anymore." How did that make you feel? At the time, I was confused. I said, but looking back, I realized he was right. It was never my room. To have a room, you have to have a home. And that house was never a home. It was a stage set where I was a prop that they could put in storage whenever I became inconvenient. I looked directly at Sabrina. When I opened the door and saw the nursery, when I saw that they had erased every trace of me and my grandfather, it was not just about paint and furniture. It was a declaration. They were telling me that I had ceased to exist in their world. And when I tried to document that, when I tried to find the one thing Henry had left for me, they hit me. Conrad Hale stood up for cross-examination. He looked agitated. He knew he was losing the room. He needed to make me look bad. and fast. "Ms. Crawford," he said, buttoning his jacket aggressively, "you talk a lot about empty spaces and feelings, but let us talk about the bottom line. You are standing to inherit nearly $1 million from this new will, leaving your father with almost nothing." He walked toward me. "Do you not think that is selfish?" he asked, his voice rising. "Do you not think it is vindictive to cut your own father out of his inheritance just because he missed a few birthday parties? Is this lawsuit not just a giant temper tantrum thrown by a woman who wants to punish her daddy?" The gallery murmured. It was a cruel question, but a smart one. It played into the greedy daughter narrative. I looked at Conrad Hale. Then I looked at Daniel. "No," I said. My voice was calm, ice cold. "Henry gave my father everything." I said, "He gave him an education. He gave him a down payment on his first house. He gave him $700,000 over 15 years to bail him out of failed businesses. He gave him chance after chance to be a man." I leaned forward on the stand. "The inheritance is not a punishment, Mr. Hale. It is a receipt. Henry Lawson was a judge. He believed in equity. He kept a ledger. He knew exactly what he had given to Daniel. And he knew exactly what Daniel had given back, which was nothing." I paused. The things Henry left to me, the house on Cedar Street, his journals, his savings, those are not just assets. They are a testament. They are his way of saying that in the end, the person who held his hand, the person who learned his lessons, the person who loved him for who he was, and not for what he could pay for, was me. I pointed to the defense table. "They want the money because they think they are entitled to it by blood. I am accepting the inheritance because it is the final judgment of a man who saw us all clearly." Conrad Hale opened his mouth to retort, but he had nothing. He looked at the jury box, realized there was no jury, looked at the judge, and saw he had lost. "No further questions," he muttered, sitting down. Noah stood up one last time. "Your Honor," he said, "we have one final piece of evidence. It was found in the safe deposit box of Henry Lawson, separate from the will, but notarized and dated the same day as the final testament." He walked to the bench and handed a single sheet of paper to Judge Hart. "It is a letter of intent, addressed to the court." Noah said. Judge Hart took the paper. She put on her reading glasses. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. She read it silently first. Her eyebrows went up. She looked over the paper at Daniel. "I will read this into the record," Judge Hart said. She cleared her throat. "To the presiding judge of the probate court," she read. Her voice echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "I, Henry Lawson, am writing this letter because I know my son. I know that when I die, there will be a contest. I know that Daniel, and specifically his wife Sabrina, will claim that I was senile, or manipulated, or coerced into leaving my estate to my granddaughter Maria." Daniel flinched as if he had been struck physically. "Let the record show that I am writing this of my own free will, in my own hand, while drinking my morning coffee. I am entirely lucid. I have chosen to structure my estate this way for one simple reason. I have already given my son his inheritance. I have given it to him in checks written on the first of every month for 15 years. I have supported him while he ignored me. I have funded his lifestyle while he neglected his daughter." Judge Hart paused. She looked at the next paragraph, and her voice softened. "Maria is not manipulating me. Maria is the only reason I have not died of loneliness in this big, empty life. She is my executor not because she is greedy, but because she is the only one I trust to do the right thing when no one is watching. If you are reading this, it means Daniel has tried to take what is not his. Do not let him. Justice starts at home." Signed, Henry Lawson. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a truth so heavy it crushed everything else in the room. Sabrina had her head bowed low, her hair covering her face. The posture of the victim was gone. She just looked like a thief who had been caught. Daniel was looking at the wall. His face a shade of gray I had never seen before. All the gaslighting, all the lies about my instability, all the claims that I had poisoned Henry's mind. It was all incinerated by Henry's own shaky, handwritten scrawl. He had reached out from the grave and protected me one last time. Noah looked at me on the stand. "You may step down. Maria." I stood up. I did not look at Daniel. I did not look at Sabrina. I walked back to the defense table, but I did not sit down immediately. I turned to the gallery, to the reporters who were frantically typing, to the people who had come to see a freak show and had ended up seeing a tragedy. I took a breath. I did not sue them for the money. I said, my voice carried to the back of the room without shouting. I stood here because if I had stayed silent, the story of my grandfather and the story of my life would have been told by them. It would have been told by their tears and their press releases and their lies. I touched the scar on my hairline. They used the word family as a shield to hide their crimes. Today, I just wanted to give the truth a chance to speak. I sat down. Judge Hart looked at me. She closed the file in front of her. She did not need to deliberate. She did not need to retire to her chambers. "I have heard enough," Judge Hart said. The trial was over, and as the gavel came down, I knew that the yellow house on Cedar Street was finally, truly safe. The recess was mercifully short. In my experience as an investigator, a short recess after the presentation of new evidence usually meant one thing. The judge did not need time to deliberate. The judge needed time to compose a ruling that would withstand an appeal. When the bailiff announced Judge Hart's return, the atmosphere in the room was brittle. It felt as though the air had been sucked out, leaving a vacuum that pressed against my eardrums. I stood up. Beside me, Noah buttoned his jacket, his posture relaxed but alert. Across the aisle, Daniel and Sabrina stood. Sabrina was gripping Daniel's arm, her knuckles white, but Daniel was not looking at her. He was staring at the empty space where the witness stand was, perhaps replaying the moment his father's letter had been read aloud. Judge Hart swept into the room, her robes billowing around her like storm clouds. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked out over the courtroom. Her face was stern, stripped of the curiosity she had shown earlier. It was the face of the law when the law is angry. "Please be seated," she said. We sat. The rustle of fabric was the only sound in the room. "I have reviewed the evidence presented over the last 2 days," Judge Hart began, her voice clear and resonating off the mahogany walls. "I have reviewed the extensive financial records provided by the forensic accountant. I have reviewed the certified court records from Arizona regarding Mrs. Crawford's history of litigation. And most importantly, I have reviewed Defense Exhibit C, the video footage from the night of October 14th, and the notarized letter of intent from the late Henry Lawson." She paused, letting the weight of the list settle on the plaintiffs. "Probate court is often a place of ambiguity." She continued, "We are often asked to interpret the wishes of the dead based on the fading memories of the living. However, in this case, there is no ambiguity. The picture presented to this court is crystalline. It is a picture of a pattern of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and quite frankly, a staggering level of entitlement." She turned her gaze directly to the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Crawford, you petitioned this court to overturn your father's will based on the claim of undue influence. Yet the evidence shows that your father supported you to the tune of over $700,000 during his lifetime. That is not the action of a man who has been manipulated against his son. That is the action of a father who has already given his son his inheritance in installments. To come here now, after his death, and demand the remainder of his estate is not a legal claim. It is greed." Daniel flinched. He sank lower in his chair, his face flushing a deep, shameful red. "As for the restraining order and the allegations of assault against Ms. Crawford," Judge Hart said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, "the video evidence is conclusive. Ms. Crawford did not attack anyone. She was the victim of an unprovoked and violent assault by Mrs. Crawford. The fact that you, Mrs. Crawford, would then come into my courtroom, take an oath, and weep while accusing your victim of the very violence you perpetrated is an affront to this institution." Sabrina let out a sob, but it sounded thin and hollow. No one in the gallery moved to comfort her. Therefore, Judge Hart ruled, the court orders the following. The last will and testament of Henry Lawson, dated June 4th, is hereby upheld as valid and binding. Maria Crawford is confirmed as the sole executor and primary beneficiary. The petition to contest the will is dismissed with prejudice. The petition for a restraining order against Ms. Crawford is dismissed with prejudice. She picked up a pen and signed the order in front of her with a sharp, scratching sound. Furthermore, given the fraudulent nature of the claims and the malicious intent behind the temporary conservatorship motion, the court finds that this litigation was abusive. I am ordering the plaintiffs, Daniel and Sabrina Crawford, to pay all court costs and to reimburse Ms. Crawford for 80% of her legal fees. Judge Hart set the pen down. She folded her hands and looked straight at Sabrina, who was now trembling, her face buried in her hands. Mrs. Crawford, the judge said, the courtroom is not a slot machine you pull whenever you regret how someone chose to live and love. The sentence hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It was not just a legal ruling, it was a moral evisceration. Court is adjourned, Judge Hart said. She banged the gavel. The sound signaled the end of the war. Sabrina burst into loud, wailing tears. But this time, the sound did not evoke sympathy. It evoked embarrassment. The reporters in the front row were already packing up their laptops, their faces grim. They realized they had been used to peddle a lie. I looked at Daniel. He was standing up slowly, like an old man. He looked at his weeping wife. His hand hovered in the air for a moment, as if he were going to pat her shoulder, the way he had done 1,000 times before. But then, he looked at the screen where the video had played, the video of him watching me fall. He dropped his hand. He did not touch her. He turned away and began shoving papers into his briefcase with trembling fingers. I stood up. Noah turned to me and extended his hand. "Congratulations. Executor," he said. I took his hand. "Thank you, Noah." We walked down the center aisle. The gallery parted for us. The whispers that followed me were different now. They were whispers of awe, of respect. As we pushed through the heavy oak doors and out into the lobby, the press was waiting. A wall of flashes blinded me for a second. Microphones were thrust into my face. "Ms. Crawford, how do you feel?" "Ms. Crawford, what will you do with the house?" "Do you have a comment on the judge's ruling?" I stopped. I raised a hand, and the questions died down. I looked into the cameras, knowing that somewhere, in the small yellow house on Cedar Street, the ghost of Henry Lawson was watching. "Henry Lawson chose me when he was alive," I said, my voice steady and loud. Today the court simply honored that choice. I turned and walked toward the exit, Noah flanking me. We stepped out onto the wide stone steps of the Clearwind County Courthouse. The autumn air was crisp and cold, biting at my cheeks. It felt like a cleanser, washing away the stale, recycled air of the courtroom. "Maria." The voice came from behind me. I knew that voice. I had spent my childhood waiting for it. I stopped. I did not turn around immediately. "Maria, wait, please, wait a minute." I turned slowly. Daniel was running down the steps after me. His expensive suit looked rumpled. His hair was messy. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. I looked at him. I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, just a profound, quiet distance. "Maria," he said, panting. I wanted to say." He looked at Noah, then back at me. "I am sorry about the hallway," he said. "I am. You have to understand. Sabrina, she has been under so much pressure. The hormones, the baby. She lost control because she was scared. She didn't mean to hurt you." He was doing it again, even in defeat. He was rewriting the script. He was finding a way to make the violence an accident, a symptom of stress, something that just happened to us, rather than something that was done to me. I looked at him, and I saw the man who had missed my graduation, the man who had missed my birthdays, the man who had stood in a hallway and warned his wife about a camera instead of checking if his daughter was breathing. It was not Sabrina's hand that hurt the most. "Dad," I said. He blinked, Confused? What? You keep talking about her losing control, I said, my voice calm. But you were there. You saw it happen. You stood 3 feet away. I took a step closer to him. You also have an arm. Dad, you have 2 of them, and you had a choice that day. You could have stepped between us. You could have helped me up, but you didn't. You chose to stand still. You chose to watch. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The truth of it silenced him. And just then, Sabrina appeared at the top of the stairs. She had fixed her makeup, but her eyes were wild. She saw Daniel talking to me and rushed down, her heels clicking frantically on the stone. "Daniel!" she called out. "Daniel! Do not talk to her! She ruined us!" She reached the bottom of the steps and moved toward me, her hand outstretched, perhaps to grab my arm, perhaps to plead, perhaps to strike me again. I did not flinch this time. I did not step back. I stepped forward. "Stop," I said. The word was not a scream. It was a command. It stopped her in her tracks. She looked at me, startled by the force in my eyes. "Do not ever touch me again," I said. My voice was low, deadly quiet. Sabrina looked at Daniel, waiting for him to defend her, but Daniel was looking at the ground. "We are family. Maria!" Sabrina hissed, trying one last time to use the weapon that had worked for so long. "You cannot just walk away with everything." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had turned my sanctuary into a nursery and my life into a lawsuit. The door between us closed the moment I opened the door to my room. I said. I turned my back on them. I walked toward Noah's car, which was idling at the curb. The wind caught my hair, blowing it back from my face. I felt lighter with every step. I could hear Sabrina shouting something behind me, something about an appeal, something about fairness, but her voice sounded small, carried away by the wind. It sounded like a ghost story that I no longer believed in. Noah opened the car door for me. I slid into the passenger seat. The leather was cool. I looked out the window as Noah got in and started the engine. I looked back at the courthouse one last time. It was a massive, imposing building of stone and glass. I had walked in there yesterday as a daughter trying to reclaim a box of memories. I was leaving as a woman who had reclaimed her life. I saw Daniel and Sabrina standing on the steps. They looked small from this distance, 2 figures trapped in a story of their own making, bound together by lies and losses. I watched them until the car turned the corner and they disappeared from view. I sat back and closed my eyes. The yellow house on Cedar Street was waiting for me. The journals were waiting. The truth was safe. I thought about Henry. I thought about the empty chair at graduation. I thought about the blinking red light in the hallway. I had spent 24 years leaving the door unlocked, hoping my father would walk through it and finally be the parent I needed. Today, I had locked it, and as the sound of the car door latching clicked shut beside me, I realized it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of an ending, and it was the sound of a beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at home, or maybe while working? Please comment below to share your thoughts and connect with others. And if you enjoyed Maria's journey to justice, please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach and inspire even more people.